Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode for the Financial Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Liu. And as you know, I'm always in the marketplace for talent, cutting edge ideas, new innovations, getting those insights and distinctions and applying them in all aspects of our lives: time, location, health, and financial freedom. So today I have a special guest at Avni, and she's going to talk to us all about she is a therapist, but she's also a empowerment and relationship coach. She's also a trainer, consultant, and she's going to talk to us from the perspective of marginalized communities, underrepresented communities. And I'm excited for this. So, Avni, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me as your guest. I'm very excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, you have a very interesting slant. You're advocating for a particular segment of the population, and so tell the audience about your background, your story, and how you got started.
Absolutely. So I've been in the mental health field for about 15 years now. And I started as a social worker, and then I transitioned to a therapist and a trainer and a coach, as you said, empowerment and a relationship coach. And this was a career that I definitely didn't just land in because as a South Asian woman, the expectation was you're going to be in the medical field or engineering. And I didn't pick that. So there was some unconventional decisions that I made, which I know had brought a lot of anxiety to my parents and family, as well as picking something unconventional. As I look back at my career a decade plus later, it's definitely something that is a calling, and it makes sense that I picked this major because I am the mediator in my family and friends, and I am the person that people come to. So it's interesting when you look back at your career of, oh yeah, that makes sense that I would pick something related to this field. But I'm very excited because I've had my own journey moving from employee to entrepreneur, and that's been such a massive learning curve. And I know you kind of share this on your podcast in different episodes, but nobody really teaches you how to run a business or even think about finances in this way in schools or at colleges even. So I'm very excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a complicated way to, especially from South Asian culture, especially coming to America. You have to deal with so much standards, expectations. It's almost, I think it's, but so tell us, for example, so okay, so one thing is why is it so important? Basically, how do people, especially people of different color, races, gender, ideas, cultures, why it's so important for them to have a cultural, racial identity? Growing up, I was taught to try and assimilate into white culture, shun kind of your past, but you have this different idea. So tell us more.
I think oftentimes your story isn't unique because I know so many of us, and I definitely am an immigrant to this country as well. And there was this assimilation that happened, and this sort of unspoken rule of American means white, even if no one maybe overtly say it. Sometimes they might have overtly said that. And so it's been really interesting because from a mental health perspective, what I've come to learn is when we negate our identity, we often get in a place where we don't feel enough, we don't feel worthy. And so much of our identity, how we function, what decisions we'll make, what risk we'll take, what things we'll do or not do are tied to how grounded we feel as individuals. And I feel often as people of color, and especially as immigrants, there is this notion of, playing like living two lives or code switching, as I call it. And so it's been my own journey to acknowledge the difference that I come with, but also celebrate the difference that I come with, because it makes me more grounded. And the more that we're trying to assimilate or be something that we're not, that just has a really big impact. Like I remember when I was making the transition from social worker to therapist, logistically, I had all the things figured out, but the readiness wasn't there. And when I really sat down and heard the noise, the chatter, the internal chatter that was coming for me, I realized it was because I imagined a therapist to be white and I wasn't white. So how am I going to, fulfill a role that I don't even see myself in? And it took a moment to realize, okay, you have the skill sets, you've done this, you're licensed, you're an expert in this field. That's what you would be considered. And so how do you, unlearn some of the things or the messages that are so often told to us for so many of us, and just human beings in general? We're constantly working towards feeling enough and feeling worthy and feeling deserving. I think there's an extra layer for people of color or for immigrants that is like added to the mix.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. And, talking to, because it's kind of like a lot of, we don't feel like we belong because, you try to assimilate into white culture, but you're not white. And then like, for example, you try to assimilate into Asian culture, they don't view you as Asian because you're westernized. So, you're kind of SOL, you're kind of, which is quite interesting. So, do you consider this from a social work perspective? Is this idea of micro traumas, microaggression, whether from the white people, or, is this, tell us more.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely consider it as the clients that I see, whether it's in therapy or coaching. I'm very open to talking about culture. Racial trauma and culture trauma is real. It has impact on our mental health and well-being. And so I'm absolutely open to talking about it. And most often my clients sort of feel this sense of relief that I'm not guarded or, oh, we can't talk about that because it's part of your identity. We, bring it on and let's have a conversation. I also just want to name, because this idea of microaggressions happens so often for so many people of color on even something simple as, where are you born? Where are you really, really from? And I've heard that so often. But one thing that a story that I bring up often is I actually didn't even know the term microaggression until I started undergraduate and I was taking a multicultural psychology class. And my professor, who was half Asian and half white, had sort of told us about this term microaggression. And
Mm.
at the time, I was 18 or 19. And so it made me realize all the years that I had so many instances that I didn't have a word or language to. So often we may experience something where intuitively and instinctively we feel like that felt off, but I can't really overtly say that that was really, microaggression or not. And we're left in this constant state of mixed message or confusion, which probably is just raising anxiety for people, to be really honest. Sometimes language brings some power to us as well, because I didn't even know the term microaggression, but I knew when someone's asking me, where am I really from? Or telling me my English is very good, or I'm very articulate. I knew something felt off, but I didn't know what that off feeling was about.
Yeah. The other question I have is a lot, because the audience, a lot of there's entrepreneurs, there's doctors. One thing is I've always had this thing is, you see in the movies, you see CEO, you see on the media, it's all a particular race, it's particular gender, particular age. And so, but then when with high achievers, for, it could be immigrants, could be people of color, it could be anything. So do they aspire to this? Is this the norm, or can they go out and create their own? Do they have to, you know, um, you know, fight the status quo, or do you find them becoming more entrepreneurs, creating their own paths, etc.?
I think it depends on you as an individual. There are many people who, want stability, and there's nothing wrong with stability, and are probably going to walk the path of, I'm going to get a stable job that has benefits and has pension and all these other things, because that's what we're taught to do. And I'm not knocking that in any way, shape, or form. I did that for 10 years. And so I'm not, that that was my life as well. And somewhere down the line, I realized I wanted more from not just life, but just how I structured my time and what was bringing me value, which allowed me to be an entrepreneur during the pandemic, primarily full time. I had already been doing certain things that were entrepreneurial since 2016, but they were all sort of these side hustles, and I never saw them as business. And it was during the pandemic, like many people, that it made me realize, no, Avni, this is a business and you need to start honoring it that way. But I bring that up because so many of us have been taught, you get an education, you get a career, you go move up the ladder, and you do XYZ. And I find sometimes with the clients that I've worked with who are very high functioning, because almost all my clients are very high functioning, they find that they've climbed the ladder, they've had their goal, they've achieved their goal, and there's this emptiness sometimes that they feel around, I thought this was what was going to make me happy, and now it's not making me happy. I don't even know what's making me happy. And so I find often with people who are high functioning, especially in your profession and mine, there's sort of this expectation that this thing is going to fix something, or this thing is going to be the status that I was looking for. And now I'm going to be feeling whole. And then you get there and you feel some of that high for sure, but then it doesn't sustain you. And so there is this, so what is next? And I feel so often, especially as immigrants, and I know for me this is true, I thought that was my path as well. I had a very stable job. I was going to climb up the ladder, and then I got promoted and I realized this isn't what I actually want to do. I need to do something different. And it was really to acknowledge that I want something different, because I think sometimes people also feel making a different decision means I no longer am loyal to that decision that I made a couple years ago, or whenever you made that decision. That fear is real. I've seen that happen with many of my high functioning clients, where they'll have a certain set of goals and ambition, and then they meet them and they're like, okay, I thought this was going to be it, and now it isn't. So what is next? And that's where I work on what are some of the limiting beliefs that are keeping you stuck in not taking that risk or taking that chance that you really actually want to do.
You brought up a good point, because a lot of, especially in medicine, has a lot of South Asians, and a lot of them are, myself included, we do it for, the pride of the family, or for your parents, bragging right. You're kind of like a puppet, just checking off boxes, not really living your life. And you accurately describe it. It's like, is this all there is, or whose life am I living? So how do you balance expectations and norms of your culture community with your own personal beliefs and values? What if a person of Asian, they don't want to go to medical school, they want to be a lawyer or entrepreneur or whatever, and their parents are saying you will be a doctor, all this, how do they balance that?
Yeah. First of all, that pressure is real. And so if anyone listening to this is going through that situation, I have a lot of compassion for you, because I know it's not as easy as just saying no. Sometimes that parental pressure is very real. And depending on how strong that is coming for you, it can be really hard to say no. And I do think in our cultures, especially my culture, and I know for you as an Asian person as well, saying no is not something we're taught when we grow up, right? I remember in my families, there'd be many instances where people are invited where no one really wanted them there, but they're still invited, or we're doing things that we don't really want to do, but we're still going to do it because we don't want to say no and look bad. And so the constant message that we're getting over and over is saying no is bad. And what I would say to someone, because I was absolutely in that position as an 18-year-old, making that decision of picking psychology versus medical, because I was that person that felt that I needed to give back to my family and be a doctor. One sibling of mine has to be a doctor, so that's going to be me. And I realized that wasn't really what I wanted to do. And so if there's a nagging voice in your gut or in your instinct that keeps telling you this isn't the path, it doesn't feel right, I hope you can slow down and listen to it and get very clear on this isn't the path. I want to be a lawyer or an entrepreneur, as you brought up as an example. And then try to have a conversation with your parents if you can on, I'm going to make a different decision. They're probably not going to be supportive right away. And depending on the degree of how much influence they have in your life, it will be really, really hard. But if this instinct keeps coming up as a, this is really what I want to do, and it brings that curiosity or that intrigue in you as you think about being a lawyer or an entrepreneur, and that excites you more than something else, I really hope you can listen to it, because at the end of the day, and this is me speaking 15 years later, I know I'm a lot happier in my life, which makes my parents happy and my family's happy, because I would have been a very different person had I picked the field that I really didn't want to go in. So I'm here to give people, this sort of push and encouragement of, it will be very hard. They probably won't support you right away. But if you know that the internal voice is really saying this feels more right than the other thing, I hope you follow that, because my parents didn't come around right away. But as soon as I got into UC Berkeley, it didn't matter that I was in a social work field. It's like, oh, you're in UC Berkeley, this is fine. And so, they will come around as they see you progressing and your interest in your particular field. And what I've learned often with so many of my clients is, when you enjoy your work, the money and that finance absolutely comes and flows with you. And so if it is money that you need to show at the end of it to your parents, it's going to come if you're doing what you enjoy.
Yeah, so well said. I think this is very, a lot of, resonates with a lot of the listeners here. The other thing I noticed is that from, especially with tiger parents, and you mentioned not being able to say no, it really hinders you as an adult when you're working in group settings, team settings, especially corporate America settings, where there's bullies and then we don't know how to implement boundaries. We don't know how to speak up. So how do we develop this early on, especially in overbearing families?
Yeah, that's the number one question I get asked, by the way, is boundaries. And that is something that I work with my clients all the time. Imposter syndrome, perfectionism, and boundaries are like the thing outside of the cultural piece, although culture is like very much tied to all those three things. I wasn't taught to have boundaries. I know many people in their cultures, if you've been in a collective culture, you probably also weren't taught to have boundaries. One of the things that come up as our negative voice when we are trying to implement boundaries is, I'm being selfish. This means I don't care. Or the other person may tell you that, because I've had, family members say, oh, you don't care. And it's like, no, it's not that I don't care. I know that that's not what I want to do. And so one of the things that I've had to tell myself, and one of the things that I work with my clients is, boundaries are really, really hard, and it takes consistency and a lot of energy. So if you are not ready to be consistent and put in the energy that it requires, don't start having boundaries yet. Like, find your readiness first, on almost like the way you would if I need to, get fit and I'm going to follow this health regime and this is the commitment I'm making. Sort of having that sort of mindset walking into starting to implement boundaries. From there, I would highly, highly suggest not to go overboard and pick every single thing you want to put boundaries on, because when we realize there's been so much cost, there's also burnout that we realize in not putting boundaries. So often people go on overdrive, as I call it, to say everything is a no, and I'm going to say no to every single thing. And what that does is it creates burnout. It exhausts you. You don't you don't have any way of being consistent in all the boundaries. And so you lose steam, and all you tell the other person is to dial up at that level 9 to have me just back up. And so what I say is figure out, if you are to scale it in order of importance, 1 being the least important and 10 being the most important, what is the most important boundary you want to stand on? And that's the only thing you're going to focus on. Your 9 or below, you're going to let go. You're not going to like that you're letting it go, but you're going to let go for now so that you can practice on what is the most important thing. And you're absolutely, regardless of how much your family or friends love you, you're absolutely going to expect that the moment you put the boundary, which you've never had, they're going to dial up. Because what's happening for them is they're anxious that you're changing this dance or this dynamic, and they don't know how the relationship is going to be. So it may not even be out of maliciousness. It may simply be they didn't get the memo that you're changing the dance. So if you can anticipate that pushback, because I think sometimes that's really surprising for people to see the level of pushback they receive. But I call it as this is part of the process and the ingredients. So pushback. Yeah. So those would be my like main 3 pointers when it comes to boundaries.
I love that. Start with small ones and then focus on that energy. And it's almost like a muscle, which is quite interesting that something that I learned. Again, very impactful, insightful conversation. How do people contact you, follow you, reach out to you on social media?
So I'm being brave as an entrepreneur myself, and I started a YouTube channel. I call myself the Indian Counselor. So I would love if everyone can subscribe my channel. It just talks about all kinds of things related to culture, related to mental health, relationships, boundaries is definitely a topic that I also talk about. So please follow me on social and as on any of the social media platforms, whether it's TikTok, Instagram. I call myself, it's at the Indian Counselor, but I would love for people to share some love on YouTube and subscribe to my channel at the Indian Counselor.
Yeah. And for all the listeners out there, let's thank Avni for this really insightful conversation. Believe me, you're not alone when you feel what she's describing, and be sure to follow her on all her social media channels, and her website will be included in the show notes. And with that, thanks so much for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated my time.